Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a seriously fascinating empirical study by organizational researchers Bradley Owens and David Heckman. And let me tell you, it completely flips the old great man theory of leadership right on its head. We're going to look at the actual data together to unpack the totally unexpected, measurable power of a trait you probably don't associate with cutthroat corporate success. And that trait? It's humility.
Okay, let's dive into this. When you picture a highly successful, dominant leader, who pops into your head? You're probably thinking of unwavering confidence, a booming voice, right? Someone who literally always has the perfect answer. And because of that stereotype, a lot of us instinctively say yes to the idea that humility is a weakness. We kind of equate it with low self-esteem, or passivity, or just an inability to make the tough calls. But what if humility isn't a flaw at all? What if instead it's actually this hidden, stabilizing superpower that builds incredibly resilient organizations? To really get this, we actually need to look backwards before we look forward. Listen to this quote by William Penn. "Sense shines with a double luster when it is set in humility. An able yet humble man is a jewel worth a kingdom." Historically, humility just wasn't seen as a weakness or having an inferior sense of self-worth. It was actually viewed as a classical source of strength. Philosophers called it a temperance virtue, basically something that guards against extremes and keeps you grounded in a proper, objective view of yourself. It's not about thinking less of yourself, It's about thinking of yourself less. So, researchers Owens and Heckman conducted 55 in-depth interviews across a huge variety of contexts to see how this actually plays out today. Here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, rethinking leader humility. Second, admitting faults and limits. Third, spotlighting follower strengths. Fourth, modeling true teachability. And finally, the boundaries of humility.
Section 1. Rethinking leader humility beyond the great man myth. For decades, the business world has been completely obsessed with the hero myth. But after an entire era of corporate scandals driven by unbridled ego, hubris, and executives who literally thought they were infallible, well, researchers realized we needed a new model. Our organizational environments are just getting way too complex. It's practically impossible for one single leader to figure everything out from the top down, which is forcing a massive shift toward bottom-up leadership. Now, I know this chart looks like a wiring diagram for a nuclear submarine, but don't worry, we're not going to get bogged down in the academic formatting. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how the researchers took mountains of complex interview data about this shift and distilled it into a clean, understandable model. It breaks down the exact behaviors, the follower perceptions, the outcomes, and the specific circumstances that actually make humble leadership work.
Let's move to Section 2, Admitting Faults and Limits, Showing Humanness.
So let's look at the first of the three core humble leader behaviors. Now, it is absolutely crucial to understand that humble leaders are not blind to their own strengths. They know exactly what they're good at. But the real power comes from having the courage to show their humanness. They don't pretend to be these infallible superheroes. And this goes way beyond just saying, "Oh, I messed up," though, taking the blame for failures is a huge part of it. It also involves openly acknowledging knowledge gaps. But honestly, maybe the most surprising finding in the whole study was about regulating emotions. Humble leaders have this incredible self-awareness. They recognize when they're losing control of their emotions in real time, and they know exactly when to step aside, take a breath, and let a cooler head handle a tense situation instead of just reacting defensively.
I absolutely love this real-world anecdote from the study. One of the leaders actually announced to their direct reports, quote, "I am not a good listener. Help me to remember to just be quiet and shut up for a bit," end quote. I mean, wow. They didn't hide their weak spot. They put it front and center. By actively asking their team to help them compensate for that weakness, they instantly destroyed the barrier between management and the frontline. It builds incredible trust because the followers see the boss as a fellow human being who's just actively trying to grow.
All right, Section 3, Spotlighting Follower Strengths, Shifting the Focus.
Think of it this way. If a narcissistic, ego-driven leader sees themselves as the sun that everything else revolves around, a humble leader acts more like a spotlight operator. A non-humble leader is often deeply threatened by exceptionally talented followers. They're terrified of being outshone, so they steal ideas, they take all the credit, and they constantly use the word "I." The humble leader does the exact opposite. They act as dedicated students of their followers' unique strengths. They're genuinely thrilled by talent. They give real, authentic credit, not just empty flattery, and they actively use their platform to make sure upper management knows exactly which team member came up with the winning idea.
So the crucial point is perfectly captured in this quote. This was shared by an interviewee who watched a leader actually undergo structural behavioral change after getting some harsh feedback. Listen to this. He always talks in terms of we, like As a region, we're doing this, and we're making this happen, and we. The transformation wasn't about faking a new personality. It was marked by a fundamental shift in vocabulary, moving from I to we. And that simple, literal shift in language signifies a massive internal shift in how a leader views success. It becomes a shared team victory, not just a personal trophy on their desk.
Moving right along to Section 4, Modeling True Teachability, the leader as a student. Now, this is arguably the most central element of the whole model. This is where the leader fundamentally redefines their role from having all the answers to being the ultimate student of continuous learning. Teachability means believing you don't have all the answers and being entirely open to role reversals with your followers. It means willingly stepping off the golden throne to jump right into the trenches. Imagine a scenario where the boss actually becomes the trainee and the employee becomes the trainer. Humble leaders don't just tolerate this kind of thing, they actively initiate it to learn directly from their team.
So what does this actually look like in the real world? Well, it means listening before you speak and actively seeking out feedback. But it also literally means getting your hands dirty with grunt labor. In the study, leaders reported making sales calls right alongside their junior reps and explicitly asking for critiques on their own performance. In one wild example, a higher-ranking military leader actually broke his leg helping his soldiers lift a heavy generator off a truck. No task was beneath him. That level of physical and mental solidarity, that creates a workforce that is incredibly engaged and just fiercely loyal. Finally, we arrive at Section 5. The boundaries of humility. When does it fail?
Now, the researchers were very careful to point out the contingencies of this model, acknowledging that humility is not some magical fix for absolutely every organizational situation. There are specific boundaries on when and where humility actually drives results. On the left side of this table, we have contextual factors, like whether the organization has a learning culture or if they're facing extreme threat. On the right, we have leader traits, meaning the baseline competence and sincerity of the person showing humility. Basically, if a leader tries to be humble but lacks baseline competence, or if they try a collaborative learning process during an intense crisis, things can go south really fast.
Let's look a little closer at extreme threat and time pressure. The study highlighted that in intense situations, think military combat or emergency disease control, followers really do not need a collaborative learning process. What they need is immediate, decisive stabilization. When timeliness is literally everything and lives are on the line, being humble is just not the best approach. Taking the time to seek opinions and model teachability just takes way too long. In those volatile moments, a leader has to step up, make the hard call, and execute. As one interviewee brilliantly put it, then the leader can go home and privately freak out.
Another massive boundary here is sincerity. Behaving humbly only works if it is authentic. The researchers found that instrumental humility, which is basically fake humility used to manipulate people or fish for compliments, backfires massively. Followers are incredibly perceptive, right? They can immediately spot when a leader is just going through the motions or handing out insincere, empty praise. It instantly puts the team on the defensive and completely shatters trust. Authentic humility, on the other hand, is genuine, it's consistent, and it builds deep, lasting loyalty. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the fascinating social dynamic the study uncovered regarding baseline competence. Humility is really only effective if the leader is already perceived as competent. But establishing that baseline, it is definitely not a level playing field. The data showed that younger leaders, lower-level managers without clear titles, and female leaders often face a really frustrating double bind. They feel they have to establish a rigorous reputation for competence. They have to prove themselves first before they can safely admit mistakes without just being judged as weak.
Take a look at this quote. I think humility is expected more for a female leader than a male leader, but they need to see you as competent too. That completely captures the objective reality many female leaders in the study reported. There is a distinct, frustrating double standard at play. While male leaders who display humility are often instantly admired and praised for being strong enough to show vulnerability, women often operate in a much narrower range of acceptability. They're culturally expected to be humble, but if they admit a weakness, they're more frequently penalized for the very same humility that earns men admiration, and their core competence is questioned. It's a vital dynamic we all need to be aware of when looking at how leadership behaviors are actually received.
So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a provocative question. We've seen the empirical proof that admitting faults, spotlighting others, and acting as a student rather than a dictator can completely transform an organization. But it has to start with you. Are you truly modeling teachability in your own life? Are you actually open to growth? Are you willing to step off the golden throne, embrace your humanness, and genuinely learn from the people around you? Think about it. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.